Students, welcome to another online lesson. We've got a lot to get to today. You could probably already see how long this video is. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but I know it's going to be pretty long. But today we are going to get into beginning the story of the Odyssey, which I will be reading from the collections book. Our goals today are to understand a few concepts. We're going to learn about what an epic hero is today, and we're going to see examples of how the story tells us about what an epic hero is. And we're also going to learn about epithets and what those are and how the story uses those. So first, we are going to go over the definitions of both those terms and look at some real-life examples, talk about a few things. Then we're going to begin reading the story, and then for each part of the story, we're going to read it and then look back to see what the story tells us about epic heroes and what it tells us about epithets. So first off, let's talk about each of these things. First, let's talk about the epic hero. So this story is an epic. It is very long. We're not going to read the whole thing, but it's going to take us a while, and we're going to skip at least 2/3 of it. So we're only going to be reading a little bit of an epic story, and we're still going to be reading a lot and learning about a lot. So the focus of an epic poem, an epic story, is the epic hero. The whole story has to focus around what this hero is doing and things like that. So what I have here are some characteristics of an epic hero, and we're going to talk about each of those and what they mean. So here they are. The epic hero, first up, we're going to look at A. The epic hero is superhuman, which means super means beyond or above. So like a supervisor is someone who is above you that is watching you do your job. So in this case, a superhuman has abilities beyond what a human would have. And just think of the normal superheroes, the Marvel and the DC, if that's what you like. These people have superpowers. They're stronger than normal humans. What's important about superhumans are they are still human. They are just more powerful than regular humans, but they are still humans. So they are not gods. They don't have immortality. They don't live forever. And they really are just like humans. They walk around, they can die, but they just have incredible abilities. Letter B here. A epic hero is helped or harmed by the gods and or fate. So we're going to see the hero getting some assistance from certain gods that want him to be successful. But we're also going to see that hero being tested by the gods. They're going to put obstacles in their way. They're going to challenge them. They're going to be harmed by the gods. And then we also see fate. This story mostly focuses on the gods, who are characters who are actually helping or harming the main character. But we remember fate from Romeo and Juliet, and that was the idea of things just being meant to happen without you having much control over whether they happen or not. But we're mostly going to be focusing on the gods. The gods are not the ones that are learning the lesson here. The gods are just doing whatever they can in the world. They have powers like thunder and controlling the ocean and creating earthquakes and creating wars and things like that. The gods aren't there to learn the lesson. They're just to create all these obstacles and affect the world so that the epic hero can learn the lesson. Then this next one is really important too. Letter C embodies the qualities of a culture. So let's talk about that for a second. A hero will embody the qualities of a culture, meaning they kind of represent everything that culture values, everything that culture thinks is important. So the culture that we're focusing on in this story, because this story is written about the ancient Greeks. These are people that lived in Greece, and they had their own religion. They invented many of the things that we still use today. They were basically a people that lived in a certain place during a certain time, and we're looking at their culture. Much like we can look at our culture of people that live in our country or our city, and the things that we value, the things that we think are important. So we're going to be able to tell a lot about what these people thought was important, how they thought people should act, what they thought people's goals should be. Just by learning about Odysseus, we're going to get to know more about these people and what they valued, because Odysseus represents all these values. So when you think of, if I'm something that just came to mind to me is if I thought about a hero that helps the poor, who would be a hero that represents helping the poor? The first thing that comes to mind to me is Robin Hood. Robin Hood would rob from the rich. He would steal things from rich people and then hand them out to poor people. And that kind of shows you a little bit about inequality and poverty and that relationship and class, and just from this character of Robin Hood, who is, accomplishing things like that. Again, that just came to mind. I'm not going to ad-lib anymore because it kind of takes me off focus. And the last one is overcomes obstacles. So there's going to be a lot of obstacles that are put in our main character, Odysseus. He's going to have a lot of obstacles in his way. So we're going to learn more about him and about his culture and what they value by seeing how he overcomes these obstacles. What is the way that he is able to deal with the problems that are put in front of him? So that's the epic hero. We're going to be reading the story and looking at how what Odysseus does represents an epic hero. Next thing we're going to talk about, and what we're going to be learning about today, is an epithet. A lot of you got this question correct when we did the web quest. An epithet renames a person or a thing with a description. So epithets are ways of helping us remember which character is which. We're going to have a lot of new names thrown at us in this story of different gods, different characters, different places. And it may be kind of confusing how we keep track of all this. Hopefully the epithets will help us out, because they'll give us a little description whenever they name new characters, so we'll be reminded of who those people are. And there's a number of different ways that you can do an epithet. It's kind of like a nickname too, and there's different ways that you can name a person to help you remember who they are. I'm going to give you a few examples, and they're going to be epithets that I made up for me. You're not usually supposed to make up your own nickname. That's not really that cool of a thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. I don't care. So one thing that you could write an epithet about is someone's physical appearance. So if we were to come up with an epithet of me, I would be Mr. Thomas with his beard of many colors. We can just get a tight shot of focus on what I'm talking about. Is it brown? Is it red? Is it blonde? Is it gray? Is it white? So many colors, this beard, you just can't keep track of it. So that's a description of me and my beard. Mr. Thomas with his beard of many colors. Another way of describing someone could be about a skill that they have, or something that what they do for a job. So I also have Mr. Thomas, the Rambler. And a rambler is someone who rambles, someone who speaks a lot. It isn't very concise. Like concise would be using like a small amount of words to describe something. A rambler would instead use a lot of words and a lot of talking and not stop and keep talking about a single topic. And I guess you could describe me like that. It can also, another way that you can make an epithet is talking about someone's relationship with another character. So one for me would be Mr. Thomas, Keeper of Pudge. You guys may remember from previous videos my dog Pudge, who's got a little bit of a tummy ache. He's not really feeling like being in the video right now. So epithets are describing characters. They help you remember who the character is, and they help you visualize more about that character. So those are going to be the two things that we're focusing on in each section. We're already at 10 minutes, and we haven't even started reading yet. But we are going to start reading from page 371, which I will find again because I just closed the book. I did it. So if you haven't already opened up to this part in your ebook, I want you to pause the video now, or I want you to click the link that shows you how to do this if you're not sure how to. Follow the directions there, get to this page, and then you can resume the video and we will begin. All right, so let us begin. We're on page 371, part 1, The Wanderings of Odysseus. Book 1, A Goddess Intervenes. Sing in me, muse, and through me tell the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending, the wanderer, harried for years on end, after he plundered the stronghold on the proud height of Troy. He saw the townlands, and learned the minds of many distant men, and weathered many bitter nights and days in his deep heart at sea, while he fought only to save his life, to bring his shipmates home. But not by will nor valor could he save them, for their own recklessness destroyed them all. Children and fools, they killed and feasted on the cattle of Lord Helios, the sun, and he who moves all day through heaven took from their eyes the dawn of their return. Of these adventures, Muse, daughter of Zeus, tell us in our time, lift the great song again. All right, so let's break that down. First off, it starts with something that we would call an invocation. Invocation. So an invocation is kind of like a prayer. The poet, we may remember that the poet's name is Homer, the person that wrote this story. He is praying to the gods to help him with the story. He's specifically praying to a goddess, a muse. And a lot of people didn't get this one right on the web quest, but a muse is a goddess of a certain art style. So there were different muses for the different styles of art. Like pottery had a muse that would help you make pottery, or acting. There would be a goddess that would help you be an actor. Poetry also had a muse. So Homer is praying to this muse of poetry to help him tell this poem. So it's basically, he's just the guy standing there using his voice, and the muse is speaking through him. I did that too. The muse is speaking through me right now too. Still, it just sounds like me. So he's praying to this god to tell him the story of the hero. And what's interesting here is, first off, we're actually going to talk about epithets first. Remember, the epithet describes a person or thing with a description. So we see a lot of descriptions of the hero here, but we don't ever see his name. It's interesting. You don't hear his name. He doesn't say this story is about Odysseus. It says a lot of other things. Like we learn in the beginning in line 2. It says, through me tell the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending. The wanderer. So we have descriptions of who Odysseus is. He's someone who's very skilled at all different ways of fighting, whether it's with his mind or with his muscles. And we also know that he's a wanderer. He has to wander from place to place. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch back between the epithets, those descriptions of the person, and what they say about the epic hero. So we know that he is skilled in all ways of contending. So which of these characteristics of the epic hero does that represent here? Well, I would say being skilled at everything, all ways of fighting, would make him superhuman. Because some people just have some skills. He's got all the skills. And then next we see in the second stanza here, talks more about what Odysseus did and what he does. He saw the townlands and learned the many minds of distant men, and weathered many bitter nights and days in his deep heart at the sea. So let's first start with learning the minds of many distant men. What does this say about him? I would say, it's not really superhuman to be able to meet people. Anyone can do that. But what it does show is that letter C, that he embodies the qualities of a culture. You had to be, if you're going to be an ancient Greek, you had to be someone who is very smart, had a lot going on upstairs, and was able to deal with people. So that's letter C. He weathered many bitter nights and days in his deep heart at sea. That is line 8. Or 7 and 8. So what does that tell us about him? Well, those bitter nights and days shows us that he is overcoming obstacles. That is letter D, overcoming obstacles. So we learn again that he has a lot of obstacles in his way. Well, he fought only to save his life, to bring his shipmates home. So fighting only to save his life and bring his friends home, that would again be letter C, showing how he wasn't just thinking of himself. He had a mission, he had an obligation, he had responsibility. So that shows that he was a responsible person, and the Greeks would have appreciated that. But not by will nor valor could he save them, for their own recklessness destroyed them all. Children and fools, they killed and feasted on the cattle of Lord Helios the sun. And he who moves all day through heaven took from their eyes the dawn of their return. So again, we're seeing that there are obstacles that are in his way. And we also get a little bit of a hint about what's going to happen in the story. All his men are going to die. And they're going to die because they make mistakes. But we're also going to see Odysseus, since he's still human, even if he's a superhuman, he's still human. He's still going to make mistakes too that are going to put his men in danger. So we're going to see both of that in this story. I want to go back to the epithet, to the description of characters here, and we're going to look at this one. Again, reading from line 12. They killed and feasted on the cattle of Lord Helios the sun, and he who moves all day through heaven. So this is another epithet. We know that Lord Helios is the sun god, and it tells us that there, but there's also another interesting description. He who moves all day through heaven. So this is also referring to the sun. Stay with me here. Because the heavens would have been not only like what our idea of heaven is like a place that you go when you die. Heavens are also the sky. And this is something that is moving all day through the sky. Well, if you look at the sun throughout the day, it starts off on one side, it rises, and it appears to move throughout the sky to the other side of the world and then go down and set. You and I, we are learned scientists, so we know that what's actually happening is the Earth that we're on is spinning. But the ancient Greeks, they didn't really figure that out yet, so they thought that the sun was just moving throughout the sky. So he who moves all day through heaven would have been the sun. So that's a way for us to remember, who is Helios? Oh, he's the sun. He is moving through heaven. Then the last two lines of these adventures, Muse, daughter of Zeus, tell us in our time, lift the great song again. We see that Muse is a daughter of Zeus. That's another epithet. That is another way of describing who the Muse is. All right, we're going to move on to the paragraph in italics below this part. Now, what happens, like I said, we're not going to read the entire story of the Odyssey. We're going to skip some parts out, and these parts in italics, they are summarizing the parts that were taken out. So let's read the next part, and then we'll talk about what we missed. The story of Odysseus begins with the goddess Athena's appealing to Zeus to help Odysseus, who has been wandering for 10 years on the seas, to find his way home to his family on Ithaca. While Odysseus has been gone, his son, Telemachus, has grown to manhood, and his wife, Penelope, has been besieged by suitors wishing to marry her and gain Odysseus's wealth. The suitors have taken up residence in her home and are constantly feasting on the family's cattle, sheep, and goats. They dishonor Odysseus and his family. Taking Athena's advice, Telemachus travels to Pylos for word of his father. Meanwhile, on Ithaca, the evil suitors plan to kill Telemachus when he returns. So yes, the story gets a little confusing because it breaks up into two different stories that are going on at the same time. This is what we call parallel plots, which means some things are happening with one group of characters at the same time that other things are happening with another group of characters. So the story is mostly going to focus, especially for us, it's going to focus on what Odysseus is doing. He has left the island of Troy after the Trojan War. After they won the war, he's trying to get home. Meanwhile, back at home, we have Telemachus, his son, and Penelope, his wife. They are just waiting at home for Odysseus to come home. But what happens is a whole bunch of the suitors show up. And these suitors are trying to marry Penelope, Odysseus's wife, because they're telling her that Odysseus is dead, because he has not returned home. Other people who were at the war have already returned home, but Odysseus has not. So they are just kind of staying on Odysseus's island, eating all this stuff, being really rude, just messing with people, definitely being unlike the epic hero. They're doing the opposite of what Odysseus would do. They're being total jerks who don't respect anything. So we get to see, not only is it telling us who we should be like, it's also telling us who we shouldn't be like. So the beginning of the story, I just turned the page, we're on 372. The beginning of the story, parts that we're going to skip over, follows Odysseus' son as he tries to find out where his father is and how to get rid of all these guys on the island. But we're going to focus on Odysseus. So we're going to read the italics part at the beginning of page 372. For 7 of the 10 years Odysseus has spent wandering the Mediterranean Sea, he has been held captive by the goddess Calypso on her island. In Book 5, Zeus sends the god Hermes to tell Calypso to release Odysseus. She helps him build a raft on which he can sail to his next destination. He must sail for 20 days before landing on the island of Scheria, where he will be helped in his effort to return home. In books 6 through 8, Odysseus is welcomed by King Alcinous, who gives a banquet in his honor. That night, the king begs Odysseus to tell who he is and what has happened to him. In books 9 through 12, Odysseus relates to the king his adventures. All right, so what I want us to do right now is we're going to take a look at that map that should be below the video if you are in the Canvas page. So looking at this map, it shows us Odysseus's journey. And I want us to look in the lower right-hand corner for number 1. You should see a big gold helmet with a red kind of mohawk on top. So this part shows us the city of Troy. So this is where the story of the Odyssey begins. It takes off where the last story, the Iliad, left off, with this war on the island, or in the city of Troy. So you'll see that number 1, and then I want you to look for, to the left of that, on the water, there's a little house-looking thing with a heart in the middle of it and a sun with the number 16 in the middle. And we see underneath it says, "Home, sweet home." So this island is the island of Ithaca, and it is Odysseus's home, where his wife and son are living. So really, if we think about it, he just needs to get in this story from number 1 all the way to number 16, which just seems like just a little scoop right there, just around the corner. But obviously this takes a long time and he can't get directly home because he gets blown everywhere, all over the map, not really knowing where he's going because of the gods affecting where he's going. So really, where we're going to start reading in this next part, he is at the number 15. He is one step away from getting to his home. He's very close, and he's landed on an island called Scheria, where King Alcinous is going to help him get home. So we skipped a lot of his journey so far, and we just started. What's going on? Well, we are going to get a lot of this story in the form of a flashback. So you guys should know a little bit about how flashbacks are used in stories, especially TV and film, where we want to see something that already happened. Sometimes a character will be telling us about things that already happened, and that's what we're going to see here. The part I'm going to start next is before he starts telling the story of all these other things happened before he got to number 15. He's going to just be addressing the people. And that's another thing about an epic hero. An epic hero usually gives long speeches to people to tell them more about who he is or what he's doing or why he's so heroic. And we're going to see that in this next section. So I will begin with Odysseus addressing the crowd at the banquet. "I am Laertes' son. What shall I say first? What shall I keep to the end? The gods have tried me in 1,000 ways. But first, my name. Let that be known to you, and if I pull away from pitiless death, friendship will bind us, though my land lies far. I am Laertes' son, Odysseus. Men hold me formidable for guile in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. My home is on the peaked sea mark of Ithaca, under Mount Neon's wind-blown robe of leaves, in sight of other islands, Delichium, Same, wooded Zacynthus, Ithaca being most lofty in that coastal sea, and northwest, while the rest lie east and south. A rocky isle, but good for a boy's training. I shall not see on earth a place more dear, though I have been detained long by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth caves to be her art's delight. As Circe of Aea, the enchantress, desired me and detained me in her hall. But in my heart I never gave consent. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? In far lands he shall not, though he find a house of gold. What of my sailing then from Troy? What of those years of rough adventure, weathered under Zeus? Zeus. So that's where the flashback begins. He tells everybody about who he is and what's been happening so far, but then he's going to start telling about all his adventures. So first, let's talk about what he says about being an epic hero in this. One of the things that is important here is in lines, let's call them 7 and 8. In lines 7 and 8, he says, "Men hold me formidable for guile in peace and war." And we can look over on the sidebar to see more about what that means. Men consider me impressive for my cunning and craftiness. Basically, he's a really clever guy. No matter what the situation, in peace or in war, he will do what he needs to do to get the job done. So, what would that be on our list of qualities? That could be either A or C for me. It could be something that shows how he's superhuman, how he's smarter than all the rest of the humans, and it can also show how he kind of represents what Greeks want to be. They want to be really smart. Next up, we have a few epithets here as well. In line 18, we hear about Calypso. And Calypso is loveliest among goddesses. So we get a little description of who she is. She's very beautiful. We're not going to talk about her right yet. She's got a lot going on. And we also see in line 21, Circe of Aeaea. A-E-A-E-A. That is a word that you will see here. All vowels, and it's pronounced Aeaea. Aeaea. Just think about like Lil Jon and what he says in the song. Aeaea. I'll cut that out when I figure out how to edit. So we see that she is the enchantress. So she puts spells on people, otherwise known as a witch. She's a witch goddess. So we have descriptions of them too. Again, they're not going to matter for a while because we have to go back and tell the story. So we're going to get more about them in the flashback. And we also see that in line 23 that even though these women kidnapped him and held him prisoner, he says, but in my heart I never gave consent. So he never fell in love with these beautiful goddesses, even though they held him prisoner. He never fell in love because he was still thinking about his wife. Not saying he didn't do anything else. We'll get to that too. You're going to not like Odysseus, some of y'all, when you hear more about the stuff that he got into. We're going to continue on to page 373, the italics part near the top, to see what we're missing here. So Odysseus explains that soon after leaving Troy, he and his crew land near Ismarus, the city of the Cicones. Cicones are allies of the Trojans and therefore enemies of Odysseus. Odysseus and his crew raid the Cicones, robbing and killing them until the Ciconian army kills 72 of Odysseus's men and drives the rest out to sea. Delayed by a storm for 2 days, Odysseus and his remaining companions then continue their journey. Let's go back to the map to see what we missed. We're going to start from number 1 because that's when he's telling the story of what happened when he left Troy. So he leaves Troy and goes to number 2, Ismarus, which is where the Cicones live. And when he was there, we learned that he gets into, he challenges their army, the army's enemies, and he wins. So what do we learn about him from his ability to rob this army? I would say A, that he is superhuman, because that shows us that he's very strong if he was able to fight this whole army. I mean, he had an army too, but he was the one leading them out there and doing all the whooping. Yeah. So from number 2, he then sails all the way to number 3, which is the bottom left-hand corner, the Lotus Eaters. And we see next to that, there's a little pink flower design there. Man, this video is already crazy long, but we're almost done. Because we are going to read the story of the Lotus Eaters, and then we're going to try to think about what the lotus flower symbolizes, and then look at what we learn about Odysseus, and then we'll talk about the assignment. So, the Lotus Eaters, from page 373. And now, another thing we notice is now the story switches point of view. Because first off, it was about, or it was the poet Homer was telling the story of Odysseus. Now Odysseus is telling the story of what happened to him. So now instead of being in the third person, and now it's going to be all I, talking about the first person. Am I going to change my voice to sound like Odysseus? Let's see if it works. I might have made it safely home that time, but as I came around Malaya, the current took me out to sea. From the north, a fresh gale drove me on, past Cythera. 9 days I drifted on the teeming sea before dangerous high winds. Upon the 10th, we came to the coastline of the Lotus Eaters, who live upon that flower. We landed there to take on water. All ship's companies mustered alongside for the midday meal. Then I sent out 2 picked men and a runner to learn what race of men the land sustained. They fell in soon enough with Lotus Eaters, who showed no will to do us harm, only offering the sweet lotus to our friends. But those who ate this honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report nor to return. They longed to stay forever, browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. I drove them, all 3 whaling, to the ships, tied them down under their rowing benches, and called the rest. All hands aboard, come, clear the beach, and no one taste the lotus, or you lose your hope of home. Filing into their places by the rowlocks, my oarsmen dipped their long oars in the surf, and we moved out again on our seafaring. Let's talk about this. What did we learn? What happened on this island? Well, this island is, this story is called the Lotus Eaters, and it is about what is going on this island, the lotus flower. So what do we know about this flower? Well, we got a few things that we learned just from Odysseus telling this story. So we know that the flower is sweet. He describes it as being a honeyed plant, so it's kind of like honey. We know that it is native to the island. So they are on the island where the lotus flowers grows. It may not be available anywhere else but this one island. And then we also see that this flower seems to have addictive qualities, because when the men try it for the first time, they don't care about anything else. They don't want to go to work. They don't want to be in the war anymore or returning home. They don't even think about going home anymore. All they want is to stay on the island and eat the flower. So, that concludes the story of the Lotus Eaters. But I want to talk about going back to the epic hero and what Odysseus does about this. So we have his men, they're eating the flower. All they want to do is stay on the island. So what does he do? How does he react? Well, he just straight up brings them back to the boat. So looking at this, what do we see from the story? What does it tell us? The story of the Lotus Eaters, what does it tell us about Odysseus? Well, first off, he had to drag 3 people back to the boat by himself. Let's say that's kind of superhuman of him. Is he helped by the gods at all during this? It doesn't mention any gods on this island or them doing anything, so wouldn't really be letter B. Does he embody the qualities of a culture? Well, we got to think of what this story tells us about their culture. Odysseus really wanted them to return to the ship. He thought that the lotus flower was bad for them because it made them not want to tend to their responsibilities. So maybe it's showing us how responsibilities are important, and Odysseus was aware of his responsibilities. He had a responsibility to these men to get them back home. So he wouldn't eat the lotus flower because it would have taken away all that sense of responsibility. And overcoming obstacles, yeah, I would say that his men running away would have been an obstacle to him. But he had to do what he could, which is be strong and lift them up and tie them to the ship so that they could get home. So that concludes the story of the Lotus Eaters. So, well done. Thank you for sticking around through this very long video lesson that we have, but I want to talk a little bit about the assignment for this. The assignment for this section is the discussion. So what you'll see on this page is there's going to be a link to how to participate in the discussion. You're going to respond to the main thread, and you have some options of the questions that you want to answer. You're going to answer one of the questions in your post. So there's 3 questions, 3 different levels. You're going to choose one and answer that question. You're also going to respond to at least one other student. And you're going to respond in a way that's constructive, that adds to the point that they were trying to make. And there's some guidelines about how to do that as well. So the questions, we got 3 different levels of questions. Each one is a little bit more challenging than the last. So you can start off with number 1, but if you think if you think you can to move on to one of the higher levels, I would encourage you to do that. Answer the question for the highest level that you feel comfortable answering. So the first question, why are the Lotus Eaters harmful? So think about what the story is telling us about the flower and people that eat the flower. Why would those people be considered harmful? Level 2 question is, what lesson is the Lotus Eaters trying to teach us? So think about what lesson that Odysseus is telling us when he tells us that story. And the third one, I think this one's the most challenging. It is, what is something from our world that affects people like the lotus flower affected Odysseus's men? So this is kind of like a symbol. Think about what you know about the lotus flower, how it affects his men, and then think about, is there anything from our world that has the same effect on us? So yeah, once again, choose one of those questions and answer it in your reply, in your post, and then you're also going to reply to what another student said. So find their post, click reply, and then type your answer. So one of each. And you won't be able to reply until you posted something original. That's it. This has been going on for too long, this video. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot today. If you have any questions about the discussion activity, please let me know through email. This is going to be due next Monday at 8 a.m. But Thomas out. You guys have a good one.